This is a 1998 Saleen XP8, and it's a Ford Explorer, but much, much cooler. You know Saleen for tuning and upgrading Ford Mustangs, or maybe for the S7 supercar. They were huge in the 1990s and early 2000s, but Saleen also made a high-performance version of the Ford Explorer, the XP8, with a supercharged V8 and a lot of other upgrades. Today, I'm going to review the Saleen XP8 and show you all the quirks and features of the sporty Ford Explorer that you never knew about. Before I get started, big news, this Saleen XP8 is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids with no reserve. This XP8 has a big, rumbly, supercharged V8 and fantastically period-correct Saleen graphics and a lot of other upgrades, and you can buy it on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Saleen XP8, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the very quirky Saleen XP8. And I'm going to start with a general overview of exactly what this is, since I suspect most people watching have never heard of this vehicle, and I don't blame you. So, Saleen was a popular tuning company located here in Southern California, mainly known for tuning Mustangs throughout the late 80s and the 1990s. Now, later they also created the Saleen S7 supercar, which achieved some notoriety, but that came after the iconic Explorer XP8. So, how did this come about? Saleen is known for tuning Mustangs. Meanwhile, in the early 90s, Ford comes out with the Explorer, and it's immediately a smash hit, tremendously popular family SUV. But Ford didn't make a performance version. And when you think about it in the context of the time, it makes sense. Performance SUVs weren't really a thing. There had been the GMC Typhoon in the early 90s, but it was very low production, low volume, kind of specialized car. And after that, there weren't really any other sporty SUVs. Jeep had come out with the Grand Cherokee 5.9 Limited in 1998, but that was more of a luxury model with a big engine than an actual performance SUV. And around this time, you were still a few years away from the Mercedes-Benz ML55 AMG, from the Porsche Cayenne. The BMW X5 hadn't even come out yet. Performance SUVs weren't really a thing. But Saleen saw the success of the Explorer and they figured, hey, we're known for tuning Mustangs and we see the Ford Explorer is very popular, so why don't we get into the Ford Explorer tuning business? And the XP8 was born. So let's talk details, and more importantly, let's talk powertrain. But I'm going to start with some basics. Now, the Saleen XP8 was supposedly made from 1998 through 2001 using the second generation Ford Explorer as the base car. Now, I say supposedly made from 98 to 01 because nobody really knows. Saleen said they were going to make 300 of these, but they didn't exactly keep good records back then, and these weren't flying off the shelves. A high-performance SUV tuned by Saleen in the 90s, it wasn't a hot seller. Most sources say maybe they built about 120 or 130 XP8s. Probably fell short of their production goal, and who knows how long production even really lasted. But under the hood, you had a 5-liter V8, and there were two available configurations. The naturally aspirated 5-liter V8 made 222 horsepower and about 300 pound-feet of torque. Now, that V8, the 5.0 V8, was just the standard V8 that was offered in the Explorer at the time, with no modifications from Saleen. But it's worth pointing out it was an optional engine. The Explorer came standard with a V6, and that's the engine most people got. You could upgrade upgrade to that 222 horsepower V8, and that was the entry-level engine in the Saleen XP8, or you could go for a supercharger. You could order the XP8 with an optional supercharger from Saleen, and this XP8 has the supercharger, which added pretty big power. It brought things from 222 horsepower up to 286, and torque went from 300 pound-feet to 333, a pretty hefty boost if you got the blower. Now, amazingly, Saleen also made the XP6, which was a 6-cylinder version of the Saleen Explorer, and it was made by mistake. Apparently, Saleen would order Ford Explorers to come to their shop, and then they would modify them, and in one batch of orders, either they screwed up ordering or Ford screwed up sending, but they got some V6 Explorers. Rather than just send them back to Ford, which would have cost money and taken time, they decided to just modify them like XP8s, but call it the XP6, as if it was some limited production run, when really it was worse, and by accident. The XP6s, there's only a handful of these. I've heard 5 or maybe 10 of them out there. Not really the Saleen Explorer you want. You want the V8, and you want the supercharger like this one. And this one gets even better, because the Saleen Explorer was offered with rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and this is a rear-wheel drive model. That's right, back wheels turning, supercharged V8 rumbling. This was the XP8 that meant business. At least as much as any 1998 Ford Explorer could mean business. By the way, under the hood, you can see a special plaque that says handcrafted by Saleen, just to make sure you knew this wasn't some replica, as if anyone would go to the trouble of creating a replica XP8. But it's not. It has the original badge and all the correct stampings signifying that it's the special Saleen model. But the upgrades to the XP8 went surprisingly far beyond just an available supercharger that gave you more power than you could get from Ford. There were some other significant changes. For one, these were all lowered by 2 inches to give you a lower center of gravity and better cornering and handling capabilities over a standard Ford Explorer. They also had Racecraft Suspension, which was a pretty nice upgrade at the time, and you can see it's immortalized with this decal on the front fender. That's factory, placed there by Saleen to remind you of the special suspension. You also had Bilstein struts in the Explorer XP8, so they meant business not just with power, but also steering and handling. The wheels were also an impressive upgrade, because these weren't just regular Explorer wheels that are painted. These are Speedline wheels from Italy, and they're magnesium, which is something you find today only on very high-end performance cars. Well, magnesium wheels also on the Saleen XP8. And when this car was delivered new, it also came with Pirelli Scorpion tires, S-rated sport tires on a Ford Explorer, which was another significant upgrade. You also had improved sway bars in this car to help keep it stable under cornering, and a big burly exhaust. It was a Borla exhaust, and it helped open up the sound of the XP8 and its supercharged V8. And it actually does give this thing a surprising rumble, considering it's a 98 Ford Explorer. Take a listen. And beyond all the mechanical upgrades, you also had some cosmetic changes to the XP8 that gave it a much cooler look than a regular Ford Explorer. One of my very favorites is this number printed on the bumper, number 27. What exactly is that, a racing number? No, it's the production number of this car, the 27th Saleen XP8 that they built. Forget about a stupid dashboard plaque that gives your production number, how rare your car is, that you can only see on the inside. although actually the XP8 has one of those too, which I'll show you in a few minutes. But forget about that crap. They numbered the cars individually on the outside with what almost looks like a racing decal. The next one would have gotten 28, 29, etc., all individually numbered on the front bumper. And the cosmetic changes went well beyond that. Up front, you had a more aggressive front bumper, front fascia, lower body area that just gave the car a sportier look from the front end. And you had a similar thing in back. The rear bumper was completely changed, lower, more aggressive, more exciting, and you even had these little vents on the side of the rear bumper, which are surely not functional at all under any capacity ever, but they do look cool, which is part of what we're going for with cars like this. Now, along the side, you also had some cosmetic upgrades. The rocker panels, you can see, are flared, which was basically the 90s way of announcing that you were driving a performance car, and you had some extra body panel cladding attached to the base of the doors, as you can see, kind of sticking out, and it says Saleen with some graphics looking very 90s. All the Saleen Mustangs that they modified also had this body cladding on the sides. It was kind of a Saleen signature, so it made sense that they put it on the XP8 as well. And there were still more cosmetic upgrades to the XP8. The hood, as you can see, not just flat, it has these extra lines to give it a sporty flair. These aren't actual vents that function to extract heat from the engine, but they certainly look cool. Again, a nice cosmetic touch. You also had a rear spoiler coming off the roof in the XP8. Again, probably not functional or not that functional, but it was there and it helped this look cooler. Also around back, you had special badging. The regular Explorer badges were totally gone. You had this decal on the side that said Saleen Explorer to remind you just how special this was. And over on the other side, XP8, a cool metal badge that there's probably not many of those badges out there, but this XP8 wears it proudly. And still more cosmetic touches. The mirror caps, you can see, are finished in carbon fiber. Of course, surely not actual carbon fiber, but carbon look, which added to the sporty appeal. And this particular XP8 has had its roof racks removed. That wouldn't have been done from the factory or by Saleen, but it does contribute to kind of a sportier, lower look that goes along with this car's lowered suspension. Also, I want to go back to the wheels for a second. I mentioned earlier magnesium speedline wheels, but they're also pretty cool looking. Painted in white to match this car, although that was not done from the factory. It was done later, but it matched other Saleen models throughout the 90s. They often painted wheels body color, and so it really has that Saleen look. Plus, these are 18-inch wheels, surprisingly large for a mid-90s Ford Explorer, and they certainly help complete the look. Everything about this car is oh so Saleen, with the graphics down the side and the white painted wheels, and oh so 90s. Just a fantastic tribute to the 1990s. In fact, such a fantastic tribute that this particular XP8 won the award for Raddest Truck at Radwood last year here in Southern California. The raddest, 90s-est truck of them all, this XP8. And in my mind, it certainly deserved it. And next up, we move inside the XP8, where there's more notable Saleen touches in here. Unfortunately, though, not the seats. Saleen offered an optional Recaro seat with the XP8. There was a nice, grippy sports seat. It had the Recaro logo and Saleen stitched into the backrest, but this XP8 didn't have it. Just the standard Ford leather seats up here. But there's still no shortage of Saleen upgrades, like, for instance, the pedals. You can see this sort of bronzed metal look, obviously different from what you got in the regular Explorer. They look cool and they add to the sporty feel. Same deal with the carbon fiber. You have it, as you can see, on the door panel next to the window switches. Carbon fiber, obviously fake, but it's there and it seems a little sporty. Same deal on the steering wheel. Carbon fiber upper and lower trim, again fake, again, kind of sporty. And in the center console and center control stack, a lot more carbon fiber. Again, it's all just fake applied onto the regular Ford stuff, but it did add a sporty feel in here like you'd want from your Saleen XP8. And since we're looking at that center console carbon fiber, worth pointing out the plaque that I mentioned earlier. You can see the Saleen logo. It says Saleen, manufactured in the USA, XP8, and then this number, 98-0027. That signifies a 98 model, and then unit number 27. Of course, that plaque matches the number that's on the front bumper, also number 27. And it matches the tag under the hood as well. All corresponding numbers match an XP8. There's no trickery going on here. Nobody's faking this XP8. The only other really notable interior change to the XP8 was the gauge cluster, which is not standard Ford Explorer. You can see it says Saleen right in the center, and the numbers are in this like sort of reddish gold instead of the usual white to help emphasize that this car was different and better. Now, also worth pointing out, inside this XP8, I've run across this original brochure for the XP8, which is just as ridiculously 90s hyperbolic and absurd as you could possibly imagine. For example, on the front, it says all-wheel drive in big print on the cover, but then it also says 2WD in smaller print. Since there was a two-wheel drive version, it just wasn't as expensive, didn't make Saleen as much money, so the all-wheel drive has larger font. On the inside, some absurd 90s advertising slogans like, just because you have a family doesn't mean you don't have a pulse. And then pulse is printed twice. It's a lot of doesn't and don'ts, and I don't even really know if that makes sense, but it's there. Even better, how about the small print, not like a rock, like a rocket? This needs some explaining. At the time, like a rock was Chevy's slogan for its truck department. And so this is saying it's a truck, but it's not like a rock. It's like a rocket. And there's other stupid slogans in here, along with some images of the XP8 and some dimensions and other important information. Now, speaking of important information, one thing I discovered in the brochure and in doing some research is this vehicle was tremendously expensive back in 1998. The base price for a rear-wheel drive XP8 like this one was around $38,000, which translates to about $69,000 in today's money. Or you could step up to the all-wheel drive version. That was $46,000 in '98, which translates to around $80,000 in today's money. 80 grand for this. It's cool, but 80 grand, imagine paying that. And that was before options like the Recaro seats that I mentioned earlier, and like the Supercharger, which tacked on a hefty premium. This car has it, it added power, but it made these even more expensive. Now, obviously, that's big money to spend on a Ford Explorer in 1998. You had all the Saleen upgrades and performance parts and other nice touches, but it was still a '98 Ford Explorer. You look around this interior and you can see why it probably wasn't so popular. A lot of plastics basically everywhere. The steering wheel, the dashboard, all your cheap Ford plastics that didn't really enhance them. And so you were getting a Saleen tuned, extra power, upgraded Explorer, but still an Explorer with everything that went along with that. I mean, look over at the door panel, you can see some of these cheap plastics not really befitting a car at the pricing levels that Saleen was expecting people would pay. Again, that probably helps explain why they only made maybe 100 or 120 of these and fell short of their already pretty small 300 unit production target. Now, with that said, there were some nice touches in here, at least by the standards of its day. For example, the leather upholstery has two types of surfaces. You have kind of a perforated upholstery in the middle of the seat and then smooth smooth flat leather on the rest. This was high class. This was the best Ford could do back in this era, and so they did it. Now, in back, you also have some nice luxuries. You have climate vents, which is kind of uncommon for 90s family SUVs. A nice touch back here, and you have controls for them. You can adjust positioning of air and airflow speed, which again was not common on vehicles like this. You also have audio controls back here. Volume, seek, you can plug in headphones to these headphone jacks, and rear passengers can listen to music individually, which was how people got entertained in the back of Ford Explorers in the 1990s. They did some nice things back here, although they didn't do headrests. They have these, but they're not really going to protect or help you. They couldn't do that. That was asking too much of Ford at the time. A nice, safe, protective, comfortable headrest wasn't going to happen, but there were some luxuries. And by the way, one other item worth noting back here, on the door panels, you do have fake carbon fiber trim, just like up front, to again emphasize the sportiness, even to rear headrestless passengers. And next up, we move on to the back of the XP8, to the cargo area, where you lift up the heavy old school tailgate, and you can see the cargo area is pretty big, which is no real surprise. That was true of all these boxy, body-on-frame, old school SUVs. In the days before high floors and teardrop shapes, you could get a lot of stuff into the back of your SUV, just load it on up there. I also love the fact, speaking of old school, Ford has a cargo cover back here. You can see it extends out, covers your cargo like you'd expect, but it doesn't quite line up with the backs of the back seats. So there's about an 8-inch gap between the cargo cover and the rear seat. So your cargo is covered in the XP8, unless it's in that 8-inch gap. Then anybody can look inside and steal your things, I guess. Now, I joke about that, but there are two rather clever touches in the cargo area rear end of this Explorer. One is this door lock button mounted in the cargo area, which is a neat idea. You're loading up stuff into the cargo area, and one of your kids wants to climb inside the car, you can press the door lock button and then unlock all the doors from the cargo area. Obviously, in the days of proximity keys, that's no longer necessary, but it was a nice feature in the Explorer, and I haven't seen it in other vehicles. Another nice touch back here, the rear glass opens up independently from the tailgate. So I mentioned earlier the tailgate is pretty heavy. If you wanted to just toss some smaller item into the cargo area without lifting the whole thing, just open up the rear glass, put it in, and close it, and you don't have to lift up that heavy tailgate every time. It's a neat idea, and I wish more SUVs had it, although one of the big drawbacks is the rear wiper. It can now no longer be mounted on the glass. Since that's going to open up, they have to put it here. It sits sort of awkwardly on this weird plastic rear wiper stand on the tailgate. Not exactly the most attractive solution, but it does add some nice practicality to this generation of Explorer. All right, driving the Saleen XP8. Full disclosure, this car belongs to a close friend of mine. Since I've known him 5-6 years, he's always wanted one of these. And he found this one in like rural desert California and got it to him. And he's spent lots of money making it right. I think he's in this car, in addition to the purchase price, like 15 grand in just cosmetic upgrades, improvements, changes to make it like nice. And it is nice. Like, this is as nice of a Saleen XP8 as you're going to get. And it's the one you want because it's supercharged and rear wheel drive. So I've been around this car for quite a while, and there are pros and there are cons. Starting with the pros, the most important thing about this car, it actually drives quite nicely, which is crazy to think about, but it does. And the reason I say it's crazy, my family, when I was growing up, we owned a 96 Ford Explorer. In fact, it was one of the very first cars that I drove, and it was bad. Like, it was legitimately quite not good to drive. The steering was slow, the acceleration was crap, the suspension was a disaster, it creaked and rattled everywhere. Like, it was legitimately a bad car. And this isn't. This feels light on its feet. Now, Admittedly, it's light on its feet for a 1998 Ford Explorer, but I am stunned how much the suspension changes, the Racecraft Suspension, I'm stunned how much that actually has an effect on this car. The steering, by comparison to our old one, feels like surprisingly connected. The suspension makes it feel like it doesn't have the horrible body roll. It doesn't have the terrible clunking like so many old Explorers do when you go over bumps. Like, this is a steel, body on frame, old school, never intended to be a performance vehicle SUV, and yet it's surprisingly fun from a steering and handling perspective. I don't want to go and say it's a performance car, it's not precise, it's not a sports car, none of that. But it is also a lot more lively and exciting and like kind of throw it around than a 4Runner from this era, than a stock Ford Explorer. Like, the changes they made legitimately had an effect on transforming what I've always kind of felt was a dud of a car to drive, that second gen Ford Explorer, into something that is not so bad, actually. And it gets even better from an acceleration perspective. This car is quick. Now, this XP8, I believe, has some modifications beyond what the standard, Saleen XP8s had. So whether this is representative of, all the XP8s, I don't know, but it's fast. Like, you step on it and you hear a lot of supercharger whine, and it is surprisingly light on its feet from an acceleration perspective. Now, those are the good things, but there are bad things as well. Number one, first and foremost, the transmission. It's not problematic or dying or anything, but it's the weak link in the enjoyment of this car, there's no question. First off, obviously not a manual. Ford did do manual Explorers in this gen, but only on the V6, very rare, not a V8 Saleen situation. 4-speed auto in this car, slow to shift, slow to downshift, just not like a fun transmission. Saleen didn't mess with the transmission. The transmission's always gonna be the weak link in terms of like the performance aspect. This car is also, as much as my friend Nick has done to it to make it nice, it's still got some flaws here or there, like old Explorers do. These cars, there's been a lot of attrition, not a lot of interest in keeping them up, and so it's not hard to find parts, but skilled labor is not the easiest thing, and some stuff just sort of falls by the wayside. Like, there's some panel fitment and stuff issues, like the rear door on the driver's side doesn't close that easily, the tailgate's sometimes hard to open, things like that you'd expect from an old Ford Explorer, frankly. And then there's the interior, which is just not really all that nice, like I mentioned in the video. At the prices these trade for now, it makes more sense, but at the time that would have been huge money, and it's just not all that nice. Now, that's made up for with the exterior, which I've always felt is pretty cool. I think this is a neat looking car, like legitimately a neat looking car. I'll put up with the bad interior to have this kind of cool flared rockers, white wheels. Like, this thing looks both Saleen and like 90s cool. It's more fun to drive than you think. Even after all the stuff I've said, and you're thinking, maybe it's not so bad. It's better than that. It also has a cool sound, cool looks, and it's just totally known. Like, no one really remembers that Saleen made this car. And when my friend got this and first showed up at Cars and Coffee, it was a swarm. Like, what is this? He ended up getting that pamphlet I showed you and some other stuff to like display on the dashboard like an old guy with a Corvette, to show people, hey, this is a real thing. Yes, it is cool, it is special, and here's what it was all about. Most people don't know. It's certainly a head turner. And so that's the Saleen XP8, the high performance Ford Explorer that you never knew about. This thing is cool. It's shockingly fun to drive, and it's oh so 1990s with its Saleen graphics and white wheels and big rumbly supercharged V8. And it can be yours on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give the XP8 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 47 out of 100, which places the XP8 here against some relatively comparable vehicles. The XP8 does well, striking a good balance of weekend and daily scores. It's only beaten out in the weekend categories by the GMC Typhoon and Lamborghini LM002, both of which are purpose-built performance SUVs. And it's only beaten in the daily categories by the luxury La Forza and a few of the Toyotas, which makes sense there too. Overall, I love the XP8. It's a lot more fun than its Ford Explorer basis might suggest, and it looks surprisingly cool. If you want the obscure car to win Cars and Coffee, you've found it.